My guest for this episode is psychologist, author, and PokerStars ambassador Maria Konnikova, who I caught up with here in Barcelona at the 20th anniversary of the European Poker Tour. I talked to Maria about being mentored by Steven Pinker in college, later being mentored by Poker Hall of Famer Erik Seidel, and her research into the threats that technology poses to poker. Let's get into it. All right, well, Maria, I am super excited to talk to you because I've looked up to you for a while now. I first got into poker in like 2019. That's right around the time that your big poker book came out. And so as someone who has a background in journalism and then, kind of later on found poker and got interested in that, I've just always admired your career and your trajectory and your work. So thanks so much for taking the time to do this interview.
Well, that's a really lovely introduction. It means a lot. So thank you. And it's an absolute pleasure. You've been doing great work. I just listened to your interview with my pod co-host, Nate. I think you did an amazing job.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to talking, looking forward to the questions.
Well, that's a huge honor. I really appreciate you saying that. And just off the bat, we should say we are here at EPT Barcelona, the 20th anniversary. It's a massive poker festival, and right now the Estrellas main event is going on. So if there is a little bit of background noise, if you can hear people walking around, that is the explanation for that. But you actually already played in this event. You found a bag a couple days ago in an earlier flight, is that right?
I did. I was very optimistic and decided to play flight 1A and miraculously bagged on a single bullet, which in an event like this, which has 8 starting flights, and it's absolutely massive. When I was trying to make my way here they just had gone on break. I didn't know if I was going to make it. It was amazing to find a bag, and I did lose a huge flip to fellow PokerStars ambassador Barney Boatman.
Oh no!
With about 20 minutes to go in the day, 2 off the money. So I bagged 10 big blinds instead of heats, but that's okay. I'll take it. 10 big blinds is plenty, and I feel lucky that I get to have a few days off.
Yeah, that's okay. Still early in the festival, and 10 big blinds, you never know what you can do with that.
Exactly.
So, a lot of fun stuff. And so this is going to be a really fun festival. I want to talk more about that, but I want to go back to, talk about your career and all that.
Yeah.
But going all the way back, you were born in Russia, and then you came to the U.S. as a really young age. What did your parents do, and what brought your family to the United States?
So my parents were both computer programmers, as a lot of people were in the Soviet Union, especially people who were Jewish, like I am, which is what brought my parents to the United States, apart, from disagreeing with basically every single thing that the Soviet Union stood for. So it was a very specific point in time where if you were Jewish, you could actually leave, but because Israel said that they would be willing to take Jews. And so there was this huge wave of immigration. I think it was probably the only time in history where people forged their passports to say they were Jewish because people politically disagreed. Like that was the loophole that you could use to get out. But instead of going to Israel, we, like so many other families, applied for political asylum in the United States, were granted it, and came to Massachusetts and, had a host family, Jewish family through the highest organization adopt us, that's how we came to the United States. And luckily, my parents love computer programming and are still software engineers. So
that's interesting. Your parents were computer programmers, computer engineers.
Yep.
Where did your interest in psychology and also creative writing? How do you grow up in a STEM family like that and get interested in creative writing?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I think my mom would have gone into a creative field if she'd had the opportunity to do so, which she absolutely did not. Like, let's just be very, very clear. If you were Jewish, not high up in the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, there was no fucking way, right? Like, you couldn't get into the universities. There were Jewish quotas. Like, anyone who tells you otherwise, the level of anti-Semitism was through the roof in the Soviet Union. So I think had she been born here and grown up here, she would have done something else. But I grew up in a house filled with books. That was, my parents read to us all the time. I learned to read when I was really young. And that was always really, really important. I remember when we first came here, about a year in, we got a television. And it was like, one of these like tiny, like old sets, black and white, that someone donated to us. And we were just mesmerized by We, I Mean the Kids. And we were watching this TV, and then my parents got rid of it because they said that they wanted our first instinct when we didn't have anything to do to be to take a book and not turn on the TV. And I was really upset at the time because for a kid who has just learned English, I didn't speak a word of English when I started school, who doesn't have any money and is living in a pretty affluent suburb, so is wearing donated clothes that are hand-me-downs that don't fit in, struggling already to kind of make friends. To not have a television was like this other big sticking point because everyone would come into school. This was back before social media and streaming, and so everyone will have watched the exact same show. And everyone comes in and they're talking about it, and I couldn't. So I got really good at kind of the white lies, like, oh yeah, absolutely, ha ha ha, to try to kind of talk around it. But I think my interest in books was just immediate, and I loved telling stories. I loved writing. I think I told my whole family I was going to be a writer when I was 5 years old. I don't remember what they do. But the psychology part, I think, also has to do with the fact that I was an immigrant. I think not speaking a word of English really forced me to be so incredibly attuned to social cues, to kind of nuances of everything going on around me. And so I think on some level, like this is obviously adult me thinking back. At the time I wasn't like, I think I'm interested in psychology. But I think that kind of necessity made me really just fascinated by the human mind and, by how it worked, by what it could do, what it couldn't do, and fascinated by language, right? Which is also another component of writing, because when you lack the ability to communicate, right? When you can't tell people what you want because you can't speak, when you can't understand, it really drives home how important language is and how central it is. And so I think I just wanted to find my voice and to be able to communicate.
It's really cool that you're able to look back on your childhood and realize, how much this influenced your interest in psychology and stuff. Like you said, you probably weren't realizing it at the time, but so sticking on writing for a little bit more, because Russia has a really rich literature history. People like Leo Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. Who are some of the people who are you influenced by, Russian or otherwise?
Well, my favorite Russian, I think, prose would be Mikhail Bulgakov. I think that some of his, and this is close because there are a lot of Russian writers that I really admire, but I think Bulgakov's novels are just absolutely astounding. Like The Master and Margarita is, I think, one of the greatest novels of the 20th century, but everything is really, really strong. So his blend of fantasy, kind of fiction, almost a Russian version of magical realism, and kind of ability to look at history, to comment on everything is amazing, and his language. But I think where, in my mind, and what I still read all the time, where Russia really shines is poetry. And I think someone who wrote in both Russian and in English and wrote both poetry and prose is Brodsky, who won the Nobel Prize. And I love his poetry so much. And all of his prose later, his essays were in English. He made a big point of writing in English as well. And those are, I think, some of the most amazing essays on writing and on thinking that I've ever read. And Nabokov, obviously, I didn't mention him at the beginning as one of my Russian influences, because even though he's one of my favorite writers, most of his novels were written in English, because after he left Russia, he stopped writing in Russian. He refused. So most of the books that you read aren't translations. They're
Wow.
actually English language books. So that's why I kind of put him to the side. Also, Russia has amazing, and I want to make sure to mention them, female poets. So Marina Tsvetaeva, Anna Akhmatova, and there are so many others. I think that they have a really strong female tradition, which I think is amazing, and I think they're just brilliant poets.
Yeah, that's great. And you said, even from like 5 years old, you said that you wanted to be a writer.
I don't remember this, just to be clear.
Do you remember the first thing that you wrote, a short story or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. I wrote a short story about trolls in, I guess it must have been either kindergarten or first grade. You remember those troll dolls, with the crazy hair? Yeah, they were really popular when I was in school. And so I wrote a book about trolls, and one of my friends, I can't draw a stick figure. I am so artistically disappointing and unfortunate that I don't even know. I'm really, really bad. My sister got all of the actual artistic talent, but so one of my friends who could draw drew trolls for me, and I wrote a story on those pieces of colored paper. I don't remember what it was about, but I remember it was a troll book.
Yeah, I'm a big fantasy and weird fiction fan, so that's right up my alley.
Then I wrote a play. That's
the first
play. That was in fourth grade. That was actually like the first serious thing that I wrote.
Wow.
I wrote our fourth grade class play, and I remember it took me forever to write. And I felt like, oh my God, this is the longest thing in the world. Like, no one has ever written anything this long. And then when we performed it, we had, we got to cast it, and then the parents came and we performed it. And I think it took like 15 minutes. It was over in 15 minutes because it wasn't that long, right? I thought it was so long, but
that's a pretty big endeavor for a fourth grader, writing a play, casting a play.
It was fun. It was fun. Yeah. Well, I guess now I'm doing actually more screenwriting, so this was a precursor to my foray into the screen.
Yeah, that's great. So how about going into high school?
Yeah.
You mentioned your co-host Nate. One thing that we talked about was doing high school debate. That was something we both had in common.
We all have that in common.
So you did debate as well.
I did speech and debate.
I've always talked about, and I tried to convince my younger sisters to do debate. None of them, they thought it was boring, but it really changed my life.
It's a really great way of learning critical thinking, and I think it's actually really important. So my parents, my family gets really mad at me for this. Because I'm the kind of the person who will take the opposite side just to take the opposite side sometimes. But I don't do it to be contrary. I do it because I actually think it's really important to argue through both sides of an issue to figure out what the stronger arguments are, right? And where you stand, rather than just presuppose that, oh, well, the other side is dumb. It also makes you better able to argue. One of the things I loved about debate is you had to be able to argue both sides because you often don't know whether you're going to be pro or con, depending on the type of debate. I did lots of different types of debate. But I think it really teaches you to analyze information quickly, to communicate well, because like I said, I also did speech. So I did original oratory and kind of those types of things. I did academic decathlon. This is the nerd in me. So we were, our high school team was the Massachusetts state champions of academics. So we got to go to nationals and represent Massachusetts.
That's very cool.
I won the essay competition.
Oh, wow. What was your essay about?
It was about the rape of Nanking. So the not a very happy topic. I think that they probably gave me first place so that they could stop reading about the exploitation of Koreans. I just read about it and made a really big impression on me.
Yeah, no, but it does seem true that everyone who I talked to who did debate, it does have a lasting impact. And I mean, even to this day, working in journalism and things like that, skills from debate last to this day. I think this is a good transition to talk about your first book, which was Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes, because you talk a lot in that book about, the importance of critical thinking, and so I think that there is a connection to debate there. How did that book come to be?
That book was a total accident in a way. I had started writing for Scientific American. So I was in grad school at the time at Columbia getting my PhD in psychology. But I had always known that I was never going to go into academia, that I was going to be a writer. My advisor knew this as well. My advisor was Walter Mischel, who is known as the Marshmallow Guy. And I was his final grad student. And yeah, so he was done. But he took me on and knew that I wanted to be a writer and thought it was awesome. So while everyone else was like trying to get academic publications, I was like, I'm gonna, start submitting freelance articles to places. And so I started writing for Scientific American, and it was going well. And so they said, you can do a weekly thing for us, and which was an amazing opportunity. And I wanted to write about mindfulness. And this was back before mindfulness was a buzzword, right? At this point, like, people didn't really know what it was. It was still like very much associated just with kind of Buddhism, with, the philosophical, religious kind of underpinnings. And people didn't kind of see it as, at least in the popular culture, as a term that applied to them. And so I wanted to write about some of the mindfulness research and how kind of important mindfulness was in a secular sense without anything else. And I was trying to think of the best illustration for that. Because whenever I write, I try to kind of come up with examples, illustrations, things that people can relate to. And just randomly, I remembered this scene from Sherlock Holmes where Holmes asks Watson how many steps lead up to 221B Baker Street, and Watson doesn't know. And Holmes says, that's the difference between us. You only see, I both see and observe. And I remembered this, and it had made such a huge impression on me when I was a kid. And because I was like, oh my God, I don't know how many steps lead up to anything, right? So I remembered the scene, and I was like, well, this is actually the perfect illustration of mindfulness, seeing versus seeing and observing. Right, mindfulness is the seeing and observing, knowing how many steps. And I hadn't reread Holmes since I was a kid. I'm not one of these, there are people who are like lifelong Sherlockians. That was not me. So I Googled it to see if my memory was correct, reread it, and was like, okay, this is perfect for this scene. But holy shit, this is a really good story, and Conan Doyle's really talented, and I want to reread Sherlock Holmes. So after I wrote this column, it did really well. It was actually the most successful piece of writing I'd ever done. Like, people loved it, got tons of good feedback. When I started rereading Sherlock Holmes, I was like, this is a gold mine, right? This is like a psychological treasure trove. So I started doing a series of columns called Lessons from Sherlock Holmes, and got noticed by an agent, an editor, and those turned into a book.
So that's interesting. So you hadn't necessarily set out to write a book. You were doing these columns, and then a publisher reached out to you, an agent?
An agent reached out to me, yeah.
That's exciting, yeah.
I didn't end up going with that agent. I actually went with another agent. But that made me realize that I could, that this could actually be a book.
Were you still in grad school when that came out?
Yeah. My first book, I took a leave of absence. I took a semester off grad school to write it. Then went back and finished my PhD.
And so this might have been when you were at Harvard, not at Columbia, but is it true that you were mentored by Steven Pinker?
Yeah, he was one of my undergrad advisors.
That's pretty crazy, as far as going into writing, nonfiction books. You can't have a better
that was
mentor.
One of the reasons I actually, it was interesting because when I was applying to school, I applied early to Harvard. Like this, this is not it's not a secret. Like, I'm not, I don't want to sound elitist, but I really wanted to go to Harvard, and I got in, so I ended up not applying anywhere else. But I was, at that time, Steve Pinker was at MIT. And I was like, what a bummer, because I loved his books. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, I want to learn from him, because he's obviously done brilliant work in psycholinguistics, but like, he's such a phenomenal writer. I think the two people who inspired me the most in terms of psychological writing were Steve Pinker and Oliver Sacks. Because I remember I also read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat when I was in high school, and I was like, holy shit, this is just like next level. And I had a chance to meet him later in life as well, but didn't have a close relationship with him, unlike with Steve Pinker, with whom I'm still quite close. He's remained kind of a very positive mentor force in my life. But I was like, he's at MIT. I have zero desire to go to MIT. But you could take classes at MIT. You could cross-register between Harvard and MIT. I was like, I guess I'll do that. And then Harvard poached him. And so he came to Harvard at the same time as I did. So I was like, yes, I don't have to go there. And I took one of his huge lecture classes, I think my freshman or sophomore year. I don't remember. But ended up doing well, ended up kind of introducing myself to him and working with him, and he agreed to supervise my senior thesis.
That's quite the advisor to have. That's pretty cool. He had a book a few years ago, Rationality, that I really enjoyed. Excellent work. So, one other thing I wanted to ask you about Mastermind. So, it's been more than 10 years since that book came out, and I would say that just given where the world is today, the importance of critical thinking in, the age of disinformation, misinformation is probably more important forever. What are your reflections 10 years after that book came out?
I think that's incredibly important. And actually I'm working, I'm sure you're going to ask about this, but it's very related. I'm working on my next book right now, which is about cheating, and about cheating in games specifically. But one of the reasons that I became fascinated by cheating is because of misinformation and kind of the current state of the world, where it's very, where truth has lost kind of a lot of its meaning, and people are a little bit unmoored, and it feels like cheating is a thing just in a very existential way. And so just like with The Biggest Bluff, I used poker as kind of a metaphor for life, and a way of taking very complex issues of, luck and all of that, and working them in a more manageable laboratory. The reason that I'm doing cheating in games is kind of similar to that, right? Because it's very difficult to discuss cheating in the world at large and all of these existential crises. But if we examine why it's happening, how it's happening in the specific arena of kind of games and competition, I think we can gain a lot of insight about the current state of being. But yes, you absolutely need to couple that with mindfulness and the critical thinking abilities that Sherlock Holmes embodies, because these days it's just so hard. And I'm really, really pessimistic about the state of the world right now, in the sense of, maybe AI will do some good things, but I think that the downsides are horrific. And right now I'm not even talking about existential risk. I'm talking about things like, deep fakes, making, just fucking with our reality and with our world and with our news and with the quality of information, and kind of making people just not even know which end is up. I think that's really, really dangerous and really, really scary.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. So this will be your fourth book. We talked about Mastermind, and then in 2016 you had The Confidence Game, and then the one that really made you a star in the poker world was 2018's The Biggest Bluff. This is the one...
19, right?
Was it 2019? Yeah. That makes more sense, because like I said, 2019 is when I first got into poker.
2020 was the soft cover, so yes, 2019. Because it came out during COVID. My book tour was canceled. So it was during June when New York was on lockdown, and I was one of the kind of guinea pigs of book tour being completely virtual.
Yeah, how did that impact things, especially since you'd have books come out, not during COVID? So what were the differences?
It was really sad because we had a really nice tour planned. And with my first book, I didn't have, I was a baby author. Nobody knew it was going to do well. I got very lucky that it hit the bestseller list, but no one could have predicted it, right? I was a total unknown. I got a tiny advance, I earned out my advance on that book immediately, which, but that's to say that I didn't have a tour, because I was a nobody. My second book, we kind of had a bigger tour and a few events, but The Biggest Bluff was going to be kind of the biggest one, and that all got canceled. But I feel incredibly lucky because I think Penguin Press, which is the publisher that put out the Biggest Bluff, I think their publicity team just did an amazing job working within the parameters of what we had, and the book did well. I mean, the book managed to make the bestseller list. I think it could have done even better without, because this was COVID, the Black Lives Matters protests, like everything. Like the last thing people wanted was, a book that was about a game. But on the other hand, I think that kind of if people actually bothered to open the book and read it, they would have seen that it really appealed to the moment, because it came from a very personal place where I felt completely out of control and where, a lot of bad things were happening to me. And I think that that's how a lot of people felt at that time in the world, right? That we had this pandemic, we had all of these horrible things happening around us. And so I think that message of how to kind of regain control, how to learn to kind of maximize skill and how to deal with bad luck, I think that it resonated with people. So it's obviously hard to predict a different world, how the book would have done. I wish I could have had an in-person tour, but given that I couldn't, I was very happy, and I can't complain. Like, I've just been so ridiculously lucky that, I feel bad whenever I say anything that could be construed as complaining.
And so a lot of people know that on your poker journey, you were mentored by Erik Seidel, who, of course, is a Poker Hall of Famer, 10-time bracelet winner. I got to cover his bracelet victory in the Bahamas last year, which was awesome, but really just an icon of poker. And, I've actually interviewed you about Erik before. Yeah. I worked on a story about his passion for music, which is awesome, something I share. And, what's funny is it was actually from your book that I kind of got that idea, because this is a side of Erik that you knew as well. I think that the anecdote you use is that he asked you, like, hey, do you listen to Angus and Julia Stone? And you're like, why does this poker player know about this obscure indie rock band? But, yeah, what were your impressions of Erik when you first met him?
I still remember that our first meeting, Cafe Clooney at the West Village. And he had, impression number one, he was like, I'm perpetually early. Like, I live in fear of being late. I hate making people wait. So I'm that person who, like, makes you leave, like, half an hour early just in case there are subway delays, so that, we can make sure that we're there on time. And, it's just different personalities. Like, I really, like, it's important to me. So I was early, and this was like a big deal because I needed to convince him to take me on. The dude was already there. I'm like, how are you here before me? Right? Like, I had meant to get there early, like, scope it out, etc. And he was already there, which says a lot about someone, because, he was the one doing me a huge favor. And as the journalist, like, I always get there before my sources or whatever it is, because, like, I'm taking up their time, right? And I want to make sure that I use it well, that I'm prepared, that I'm not, run. And obviously I'm sometimes late. Like, sometimes it's, it's inevitable. I've been stuck underground in New York. I've been rerouted suddenly, shit happens, but it's very rare. And so that was my first impression, that this legend had gotten there early, and even earlier than I had. Then he was just so nice and so humble, and you would never know how accomplished he is or how smart he is, or just like what brain is in that head if you didn't just like pay very close attention. Because if you just listen to him, you think that he's a mediocre poker player who doesn't really know what's going on, and who's just kind of lucky. He's like, oh yeah, I just lucky to be here. And oh no, like, I don't know, there are the geniuses, the smart guys, and then there's me. And if you actually take his word for it, you're like, wow, this must be luckiest sunrunner alive. But it's obviously not true. Like, he works ridiculously hard, and he's incredibly smart. incredibly talented, but so damn humble and self-effacing. So those were my initial impressions, followed very closely by the realization that he's hilarious, right? Like, you don't normally think Erik Seidel, ha ha ha, but you should. Like, he's a remarkably funny guy, and I loved kind of discovering his personality and his kindness, which I think that people can see right away, and. I'm happy to say that the longer I've known him, the more all of those qualities come out. It's not some sort of act. There's a reason that, he's been married for over 35 years, that his daughters worship him. Like, he's done it right in all areas of his life. You can look up to that and say, I want to be that when I grow up.
Yeah, I did want to ask whether you two are still close because, obviously he's here too at EPT Barcelona. Yeah. You still in close contact with him?
Oh, absolutely. I like to think of myself as an adopted Seidel. I've okayed it with both Seidel parents, and I love my own parents. I'm not looking to switch families, but I've spent so much time with them that I feel, I'm so lucky that they've all been so warm and welcoming. And yeah, we're absolutely still close. He's playing the 20K right now, which I hope he does well.
Yeah, good luck, Erik, in the 20K. Hopefully he does well. Well, let's go ahead and talk about the new book that you're working on a little more. Yeah. So cheating in poker is something that is always being discussed. Every year there's new cheating scandals, especially, you mentioned AI, things like real-time assistance and poker tools. There's a lot. And actually here at EPT, PokerStars just announced new rules where they're having dealers slide cards, so there can't
that made my heart sing.
Is that something that was even on your radar that, people could potentially cheat by?
Oh, hell yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the stories that I have heard over the last year after I've made it public that this is what my next book is about are just insane. And I've talked to experts, who aren't in poker, because the book isn't just about poker. But so I've talked to people who actually create equipment for magicians, but it can be misused. And I've talked to tech experts. I've tracked down some technology to places in China you don't want to go. There's bad shit out there, and it will make you so paranoid it's not even funny. So, and you don't even need technology. So there are poker players. Some big names. I'm not going to obviously name any names on this podcast. I also am very, very careful not to have any hearsay. I'm not interested in stories that are rumors. But there are big name poker players who are very good at spotting cards. You don't need any actual technology for that. They just use their eyes. And if a dealer pitches too high, they know what you have. And they know what everyone has. And I have advocated for dealers pitching on the table and sliding cards instead for years, because that's like an old school way of cheating that's now become easier. You don't even need that kind of training because you can use technology to spot cards. But yeah, absolutely. I actually think that I think what PokerStars has done is amazing. I think you need to go a step further and not have any electronics even anywhere on the rail.
Table?
Yeah, anywhere on the table. I think phones need to be on the floor, in your bag, take them when you need them. But I think that no electronics should be anywhere near the tables. And I think that at floor's discretion, they should be allowed to search any player for hidden technology and examine the sunglasses of any player. I think that you need to crack down on this shit hard. And one of the reasons that I think telling these stories is important is because I love poker. I want it to thrive. And I think actually exposing bad actors, exposing cheating, there's some people who don't want to talk to me and don't want to tell me the stories because they're like, why do you want to write about this? It makes this person look bad. Mm-hmm. I'm like, no, but it makes the game better, right? I actually strongly believe that sunlight really is the best disinfectant. More people, I'll be happier to play poker if I know that it's safer and that people take cheating seriously as opposed to not really care about it. And I know that I'm a PokerStars ambassador, so this sounds a little disingenuous, but it's a little I'm only working with stars because I believe in the company. Like, I don't want to play online on other sites because they don't take cheating seriously, right? So I only play on stars, and then I'll play like the WSOP bracelet and ring events, and that's it. Because like there's so much online cheating, and stars has like some of the best security and protections, and they keep changing rules like they're doing right now with live play. But yeah, I just always advocate best practices of like pitch low. If I ever have at a table and a dealer's pitching high, I actually ask them to pitch lower. Like, I will actually tell the dealer, please don't do that, because it's unsafe. I cover my cards. Like, I actually cover my cards. I had PokerNews do a round with me at some point, and I think that was the first and last time they'll ever do it, because they tried to look at my cards behind me, and then in the video, it's hilarious. They're like, well, the way Maria peels her cards, like, we have no idea what she has. And I was like, yeah, that's on purpose. Like, when I peel my cards, they're like this. And I've developed these sorts of reactions after understanding what is going on out there. Oh, and I'll never, ever, ever play in a private game. Don't ever invite me.
Yes, private games. So other than the issue with dealers pitching cards too high, what are some of the other threats that you've uncovered to poker integrity?
I mean, for live play, technology is huge. And I think that being very aware of that, I would actually also ban sunglasses, because
ban sunglasses?
Ban sunglasses, yeah. Because there's so many there's so much technology that you would never be able to tell. And people don't know it, that are able to see things like different infrared and other, sensing technologies. I'm not going to get into it here, and I don't even remember all the technical stuff because I did this interview a while back and I have it written down. But yeah, the glasses tech is crazy. And that's not, I mean, there's also other lens technology but I would say no sunglasses. I would actually be very and I'd be very, very keen to have phones as far away from the table as possible. I like listening to music sometimes when I play, so like I'm hurting myself too, right?
Yeah.
But when you're on stream, like when you're at a televised table, you already can't have your phone. Like when I've gone on streamed games, your phone's locked up. You can check it on break, but otherwise you don't have it with you, and it's fine. I've survived. I'm living proof that you can go through a day of poker without a phone.
Do you think it's something that could be implemented, say, like a big event like this one? Do you think you could have like a no phone policy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that baby steps, right? So I think first, like, no phones on the tables, no phones on the rail. If you have a phone, like, it has to be, and no phones on your body. Mm-hmm. So have a bag, carry a bag with you, like put it on the floor if you can't, but nothing that can kind of communicate to you. And definitely, I love that Stars said no real-time assistance type technology, no solvers, because I love solvers. I work with solvers. Do that shit on your own time, right? Like, write down hands. I write down hands all the time. Like the spot that I played with Barney, right, where I was like, okay, do I lose this pot, 3 from the money, or am I supposed to play this differently? Like, do you think I went and checked that with a solver? Yeah, of course. Did I check it with a solver at the table? No, of course I didn't.
Did you play it right?
Yes and no. I played it in a way I lose my chips anyway, but the solver actually liked me shoving pre-flop. It was an open call, and I raised big. Mm-hmm. They like just a full shove with my stack size.
Well.
But either way, I'm getting it in. And so I'm either getting it in by raising and then getting it in on the flop, or by shoving pre. I don't think Barney... So it was queens against ace-king. I had the ace-king suited. And I don't think Barney was going to be folding queens pre. Yeah. So I think the solver's shove, trying to think through it, probably does it because it is going to fold out a lot of pairs, right? Like tens, he's folding. And jacks, he actually might fold. I don't think he's going to fold queens, but 2 off the money, like,
yeah.
Now in retrospect, I'm like, how could he have folded queens? Like, I don't know. I would have had more than 10 big blinds had he folded the queens.
Probably all going in. And yeah, so you mentioned that this book, it's not just about poker.
No.
What are some of the other case studies or areas that you looked at?
I mean, all games. So obviously, poker, chess, bridge, backgammon, those kinds of games, but also baseball, basketball, football, tennis, so sports. Anything where the competition is the point and where cheating goes against the spirit of the endeavor, right? Where like when you're cheating, you're actually like taking the heart out of the thing, where it goes against the reasons why you would do it to begin with. And also pointless cheating, like people cheating at Monopoly, where there's no money involved and like, what the fuck are you doing? But like, I think that's really important, right? Those types of things. Trivia, people cheating at trivia memory competitions, like there are all sorts of things. And I'm still working on it. So if anyone listening, as I say in every interview, if you have good cheating stories in any arena, send them my way.
Yeah, so send them to Maria. Looking forward to hearing more about that. That's definitely an exciting project. Let's take a little more on you being a PokerStars ambassador, because this is probably something that's very fun for you. You get to travel around. I get to do that with my job as well. We're here in Barcelona. But do you enjoy being an ambassador? It's probably, it's very different from academia. You got to be very social. You got to do promotional content. You got to interact with players.
You got to do podcasts with PokerNews.
Exactly. You got to do all these podcasts. Do you enjoy it?
Yeah, I wouldn't be doing it if I weren't. Like, I'm very lucky to be at a point in my career where like I don't have to do this if I don't want to. But I was really, I was a PokerStars ambassador before, and then we parted ways basically right before COVID. And I hadn't worked with anyone else. And then I was really excited when they approached me again and kind of told me about what they were going to be doing, what they were trying to build in North America, and kind of what the team was thinking, because they had made all of the right changes in my mind, basically, getting back really behind poker, and in a way that I could really agree with. So I was very happy to get to work with them again. And I think it's really important for there to be different kinds of ambassadors. And I feel strongly about the power of poker to be a force for greater good in society as a whole. And I've said this before, I think that if people kind of understand the fundamentals of poker, of game theory, of kind of the kinds of thinking that you need to succeed as a poker player, it will enable you to live a better life, to be a better critical thinker, understand probabilistic thinking, make better decisions. I think the world as a whole would be much better off. And I actually think it would help decrease problem gambling, because people who understand poker at a deep level tend not to gamble because they know the difference, right? And they actually play the odds correctly, and they try. And there's obviously like the degen side of poker. I'm not trying to pretend that doesn't exist, but I think that teaching those types of critical thinking skills, probabilistic skills from a young age is really important. And so I want people to see poker in that light. And I think having people like me, where I'm like, hey, I went to Harvard, I have a PhD in psychology, like I'm a writer, and I believe that this game actually is much more than a game and is a very positive force in society. I think that those types of voices are important, and I feel strongly that, if I don't, how else is that message going to get across if I don't work as an ambassador, right? If I don't actually get that message out there. And so even though I am an introvert, right, like do I really, would I rather be with a book somewhere by myself? Yeah, absolutely. After these events, I need to recharge. I'm a writer, I work by myself, I love, I have gone for weeks without seeing another person. And I'm married, but I have gone for weeks. Let's just throw that out there. And so it takes a lot out of me, but I think it's worth it. And I love doing it because I think it's important, and I love what poker has done for me, and I want it to do that for more people. And I also think, I hate bringing in the women in poker thing all the time, but like I do think it's an important tool of empowerment for women, and I feel strongly about that. And so I want women to be able to use it to get a seat at the table, to learn how to negotiate better, to kind of be more assertive, more self-confident, to know how to play in a man's world, because we play in a man's world. so you might as well learn it at the actual table.
And what are some of the initiatives, or I don't know, how can you attract more women to the game, or make poker tournaments more comfortable environments?
I mean, I think that it's largely a question of general attitudes and awareness, and it has to come from the top. You have to know that there are consequences for being an asshole, right? Whether that's an asshole towards women or towards anyone, and that's not going to be tolerated. But that needs to come with actual serious penalties, right? I want to be in an environment where, if someone propositions me, which I've written about, that happened in the past, that was in the Biggest Bluff, where instead of the floor telling me that there's nothing they can do, because the guy was a high roller at this casino, and then offering to move me to another table, which is kind of penalizing me, because then I have to learn the new table and everything, that this guy should have been, either given a multi-round penalty, like as a first warning, or, something that would have sent the signal that this is not okay. Because once that happens to you a few times, you're going to stop doing that sort of thing. And I think that that's a huge part of it. And I think another part of it is having female voices, so that women can look and say, oh, I can do that too, right? Having ambassadors like Jen Shahade, right? Like me, like Maria Ho, people who can represent the game well, and show women what's possible. I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's great. And I totally agree that you and all the people you mentioned are great ambassadors for the game. And like you said, help bring some legitimacy to poker, help people make the distinction between poker and other, more gambling types of gambling. But yeah, that is all great. So the other thing that I wanted you to talk to you about is the podcast that you do with Nate Silver, the Risky Business podcast, which you both launched earlier this year. I've followed the podcast. I've really enjoyed it. You talk about so many great things. I think especially during a presidential election year, gives you guys a lot to talk about. You did great content during the WSOP as well. When I talked to Nate, he said that you two had actually known each other for a while through journalism and poker circles. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, we've known each other for over a decade.
Wow.
So we knew each other before I got into poker. We became much closer friends after I got into poker, and now, like, he's, I count him as a close friend. But yeah, we've, I think the world of journalism in New York is small, right? Especially if you're writing about certain things, and eventually you kind of come across each other. And Nate and I have always vibed on a lot of different intellectual and personal levels. So it felt like a very natural pairing for podcasting, because, I had done some podcast work in the past and had been approached multiple times by various companies, including Pushkin, which is the platform where we ended up with this podcast, asking if I wanted to do a show, asking to do collaborations, and nothing felt right. And I didn't want to do it unless I found something that felt right. And with Nate, it just seemed like it would be fun. It wouldn't feel like work, even though it obviously is a lot of work. But when you're working with someone who's a friend and who you can have a good rapport with, I think that's really important. And I think that we talk about important topics, right? Like, I hope that people will become better thinkers if they listen to the way that we discuss a lot of different issues. So, I'm interested to see how it's going to go, how it's going to evolve. And I'm really curious to know what we're going to do after the election. It's going to be a very different show after that. But I'm excited, and I hope to see it continue to evolve.
Yeah, the elections definitely have given you a lot to talk about. It's a interesting time for politics. What are some of the other things that you two talk about on the podcast that yeah, what are some of the other big things?
So obviously we talk about poker and other things in the gambling world. So we've talked about sports betting, about the fact that Nate's a total degen and bet almost $2 million on sports while researching his book within 1 year. He made money, but I was like, holy shit, dude, you bet how much? This is insane. It was all in the name of research. We talk about, AI, business, technology. We've talked about crypto. We talked about cons and cheating. So kind of areas of my expertise. We're talking about sports, which is kind of an area of his expertise and passion. Sometimes we have guests on, though not often, but we've done it a few times. And actually, this week it's the two of us with Tim Harford, who is an economist and a journalist, and another Pushkin podcaster who has a podcast, Cautionary Tales. So we talked about basically risk gone wrong. So some examples in history of cautionary tales that were about people making the incorrect risk-reward assessments and being punished for it. Next week, because of everyone is traveling, Nate's on book tour, I'm in Barcelona. Next week is pre-taped. I can't say who it is, but it's another special guest. So we mix it up sometimes, but really no topic is off limits. And we've even done things like talk about a plumbing mishap that I had in my apartment, right? Because the idea is that this is a scaffolding for making decisions, and they can be big decisions like who's going to be president, or they can be things like, can I fix this myself and risk flooding my apartment, or should I pay up and call a plumber even though I really, really don't want to?
Yeah, lots of good stuff. I saw you recently had Bill Perkins on as a guest, who is a big person in the poker world, so that's exciting to see. Look forward to hearing future guests. So yeah, just a couple general questions as we wrap up here. We talked about Russian prose and literature, but other than that, what is a book that you would recommend?
Well, obviously, I have to recommend Nate Soller's book on the
There you go.
See, Nate, I'm such a good friend and podcast co-host.
That's a great recommendation. Of course, yeah. Nate's book, On the Edge, The Art of Risking Everything, which came out, I think, just earlier this month. And yeah, people have really enjoyed that book.
August 8th.
You've got it down. Oh yeah, absolutely. I would recommend that book as well. Okay, so you mentioned that you're pretty pessimistic with a lot of the way technology is going and things like that. But on the other side of that, what's something in the world that makes you hopeful?
Something in the world that makes me hopeful, man, Connor. The hard questions coming at the end.
Short list.
I think some of the same things that make me pessimistic also make me hopeful. I think that humans are capable of a lot of horrific stuff, but they're also capable of a lot of amazing stuff and a lot of amazing innovation. And I think, seeing some of the best minds trying to do things like figure out what in the world we're going to be doing to fight climate change, how we're going to protect the world from a lot of existential risks, makes me hopeful that even though humanity is doing its best possible job of fucking itself, that there are some people out there who are doing a really good job of trying to unfuck us before it's too late. And I'm putting my faith in those people. And I think there are a lot of good people out there, right? Seeing young people who care about the world is a hopeful thing. This is a little wishy-washy because, to be perfectly honest, I'm not feeling particularly hopeful right now. So I hope that some of these moonshots and some of these great minds are going to work, because otherwise, we fucked our planet. The fact that Donald Trump could potentially get reelected means that the United States will fuck its democracy. We have Putin trying to fuck the world. Not pro-Russia or pro-Putin. I think that's very, very clear. My dad's Ukrainian. I think there are lots of things in the world right now to be very scared of. And I hope we can avoid those risks.
Yeah, lots to be pessimistic about, but like you mentioned, there are people who are working hard and trying to bring about change. Okay, what is a piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
A piece of advice I would give to my younger self is to, try not to overthink things, and that, everything is going to work out. Just try to enjoy life, and try to relax a little. I was very much not Zen when I was younger. I'm much more Zen now. I'm still very type A and still competitive, but I'm someone who really tries to appreciate life and appreciate the moment. And I think I've come to realize that we're all just very, very lucky to be here, and I'm very lucky to be here. And life's too short to spend it, mad at people or upset or some people say why are you always smiling? I'm like, because I get to be here. That's pretty awesome. So I would tell my younger self that it's okay to just relax once in a while. I gave myself a nervous breakdown at senior year of high school. I was a high-strung kid.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that and the overthinking, and definitely great advice. Okay, last question for you, Maria. So you've done a lot of work on, using poker as a metaphor for other things in life, but I do like asking people, what is your favorite life lesson that can be drawn from poker?
Oh, there's so many. I hate to say a favorite, but I think the one that I think I've seen the one that I think needs to be applied a lot, so I'm just going to pick one, is learning to fold. Because the sunk cost fallacy, which is kind of this psychological fallacy where you continue to put good money after bad, good time after bad, good emotional energy after bad, because you've already invested so much, right, that you don't want to walk away. It hurts so many things, right? It hurts businesses who continue to invest money after it's clear that something is not going to be competitive or is not going to work because they've already invested so much. And they just can't admit that, they're done. Relationships, right? People who stay in relationships that they absolutely should not be in because, but we've already been together for so long and blah, blah, blah. It's just on every single level of life, we have sunk cost fallacies. And so I think just learning to fold and walk away and realize, you know what? I might have invested 2/3 of my stack in this pot, but I am so clearly beat right now that I just need to fold those cards. I think it's an important lesson for poker players to learn too, honestly. But I think that's a lesson that really translates so cleanly from poker to life. Learn to fold, learn to walk away. And it gives you so much power. And then if you avoid, this is kind of related, and it's something that Nate and I have actually talked about on the pod. If you learn to walk away, then you avoid the risk of ruin, right? Too many people just put all the chips in and then you can't start over, right? And this is something that Bill and Perkins and I actually talked about as well. Knowing that the risk of ruin is possible is actually really, really important. And how do you avoid that, right? How do you actually never get to that point? I think that learning to fold, and that sometimes folding is strong and is smart, is just such an important life lesson.
Yep.
I will be reminding myself of this during the Estrellas 1K event when the old guy 4-bets me that I really do not need to shove with ace-5 suited.
Good reminder. Always remember to fold. Well, Maria, this has been a lot of fun, and I hope you have a great rest of the EPT Barcelona, and thanks for talking to me.
Thank you. This is my favorite EPT stop, so I'm excited, and I really hope that it goes well. It's been really fun talking to you, Connor. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.